The film begins by showing the year 2016, where a man is invited for an interview because the public considers him a hero for the extraordinary actions he took during a disaster. However, instead of feeling proud, the hero feels guilty and responsible for the loss of 248 lives. 3 years have passed since the tsunami disaster, and Christian now lives alone in the Geiranger region of Norway, which is still undergoing reconstruction. His wife, Idun, has left him, taking their 2 children, Sondre and Julia, to Oslo. During this time, only Julia frequently visits him because she cares deeply for her father, even though Christian sometimes seems displeased due to his unstable condition. One night, Julia accidentally enters her father's workspace and sees many articles displayed on the wall about the disaster that struck Geiranger. Christian deliberately keeps them as a way to honor the victims and to remind himself of the responsibility for the 248 lives lost. It is revealed that this secret room is the cause of tension within their family. Idun, unable to bear seeing Christian drown in sorrow any longer, finally decided to separate. At this moment, Julia realizes that her father is still unable to move on and seems to be getting worse. The next morning, when Christian wakes up, he sees Julia preparing breakfast for the 2 of them. Christian initially smiles, but declines to eat because Julia has to return to her mother soon. Although disappointed, Julia obeys her father without complaint. They then go to the dock, and just before she leaves, Julia hugs him and says goodbye, but Christian responds coldly. Later, when he realizes that Julia left her sweater behind, the ship has already departed, leaving Christian to return to his lonely life, drowning in his sorrow, while Julia watches him from the ship. The scene then shifts to a tunnel where a man is conducting research, and shortly after he feels vibrations. The focus returns to Christian, who is watching a news broadcast on television about an accident in the tunnel with one of the victims named Conrad. Christian immediately checks his phone and discovers that Conrad had previously sent him several messages. It is revealed that Conrad was a fellow geologist who once worked with Christian. After reading the messages, Christian begins to review some other files. The news reports that the collapse was caused by vibrations from construction, but Christian believes that another event triggered the disaster. This feeling is the same as what Christian experienced before the Geiranger disaster, leading him to decide to go to Oslo to investigate what really happened in the tunnel. Sometime later, upon arriving in Oslo, Christian visits the office where Conrad worked and meets John, one of the executives. John assures Christian that the tunnel incident was merely due to construction work on a project. He even shows evidence on a monitor based on reports from a detection system. Yellow dots indicate that the vibrations were from construction activity around the tunnel, while actual earthquakes are marked with red dots. Christian still doesn't believe this, so he decides to visit Conrad's home to investigate further without asking for John's help. After some time, Christian arrives at Conrad's address, finding the house nearly empty, with no one to greet him. In one of the rooms, he encounters a girl named Marit, who is Conrad's daughter. The girl appears indifferent and even directs Christian to Conrad's room to search for the necessary documents. Soon, Christian starts looking around and discovers what Conrad had been researching recently. There are various documents, rock samples, and even maps showing seismic activity. Christian realizes that everything John mentioned earlier was a mistake. He immediately reports this and urges John to double-check whether there was indeed construction happening at the same time and on the same day as the accident. That evening, Christian visits Idun and the children at their home. He meets Sondre, who is about to go on a date with his girlfriend, Mia. When Christian enters the house, he sees Idun, but unfortunately, he cannot greet Julia because she went to bed early. Idun explains that Julia and her school friends will be performing in an arts showcase the next day. After exchanging pleasantries and expressing the long-held feelings of longing, Christian wants to explain why he came to Oslo, hoping to prepare Idun and the children in case something bad happens. However, suddenly there is a power outage. Christian follows Idun to check the electrical panel, but nothing seems to be damaged. Suddenly, they hear a noise which turns out to be coming from some rats, causing Idun to panic. Christian quickly tries to calm her down, and just then, the power comes back on. This irritates Idun, who immediately closes the panel and returns to her apartment. Seeing Idun's state, Christian decides to abandon his plan to inform her. The next day, Idun is shown accompanying Julia as she prepares for her performance. Idun isn't sure if Christian will come, but she is confident that he knows about Julia's performance. Meanwhile, Christian is at Conrad's house continuing his investigation. Marit approaches him, suggesting that he should forget about all the research because it's no longer useful. However, Christian disagrees, explaining that Conrad was very serious about his research and that it is likely very important. He suggests they work together to find out more. They agree to go to the accident site, the collapsed tunnel. Even though it's illegal, they decide to go in and start investigating. Christian finds a door that Conrad had previously entered. They then walk through a narrow passage until they find a staircase. As Christian climbs it, Marit notices something strange with the rat cages. Then, when Christian asks Marit to point the flashlight, the walls suddenly begin to shake. Christian then discovers a rock sample, believed to be part of Conrad's unfinished work. Along with Marit, Christian quickly leaves the tunnel. While on the way back to the city, he receives a message from Idun informing him that Julia's performance has started, but Christian still hasn't shown up. Instead of explaining, Christian is shocked to see that the rock sample he found has broken, realizing how fragile the ground in Oslo is. Unfortunately, just as Christian tries to explain, the communication suddenly cuts off. The opera house starts shaking and begins to collapse, while everyone rushes to exit the building. Idun recklessly ignores the officials' warnings and rushes inside to save her daughter. Christian and Marit see what's happening and immediately head to the opera house. Upon arriving, Christian receives news that Idun and Julia are safe and are on their way home. As he prepares to follow them, Christian notices John inspecting the building and decides to follow him to confirm whether the tremors were caused by an earthquake. John explains that they haven't had a chance to verify it yet, so Christian shows him Conrad's rock sample and then smashes it in front of John. This demonstrates that the tremors were not caused by construction, but by an earthquake. However, John dismisses this and points to a cracked foundation, insisting that the tremors were a result of construction flaws. Disappointed, Christian walks away while John stands still, uncertain whether to believe Christian or not. Christian then asks Marit to go home while he heads to Idun's apartment. He admits that he is still shaken by the disaster from a few years ago and that he came to Oslo to investigate the strange occurrences. Idun feels sad seeing Christian consumed by guilt and tries to reassure him by reminding him that, thanks to his actions, their family survived the disaster years ago. Meanwhile, elsewhere, John begins investigating the recent incident further and finally starts to understand what Christian and Conrad had been trying to convey. The next morning, when Christian wakes up, he realizes that Idun has already left for work. Shortly after, Sondre comes by to chat, and Julia immediately hugs her father. Unfortunately, Sondre can't stay long as he has to attend a morning class. A little later, Marit arrives to show Christian a strange video of panicked rats that eventually die. Christian realizes that the rats died due to toxic gas leakage, which confuses Marit because she had thought Christian was worried about an earthquake. Christian explains that the release of toxic gas from the mountain indicates that an earthquake is imminent. At the office, John is still investigating and monitoring several yellow dots that appear on his screen. Back with Christian, he quickly urges Marit and Julia to go with him to the hotel where Idun works. On the way, Christian tries to contact Sondre, but Sondre can't answer since he is in class, although he senses that something bad is about to happen. When they arrive at the hotel, Christian entrusts Julia to Marit and then rushes to the restaurant where Idun works, located on the 34th floor. While in the elevator, Christian calls John to explain what is happening, but unfortunately the call suddenly cuts off. At the same time, an alarm goes off at the university due to a false bomb threat report Christian had previously made. Sadly, all the students and the professor ignore the alarm except for Sondre, who takes it seriously. Despite the professor's objections, Sondre leaves the class with Mia. Back at the hotel, Marit gets into an argument with a driver, which distracts her from noticing that Julia has already entered the elevator, heading to the 34th floor. While Marit heads upstairs via the stairs, Christian arrives at the restaurant and forcefully insists on taking Idun with him, even though the other employees and guests are uncomfortable with his actions. Christian also triggers the alarm to ensure everyone leaves the building. Then, just as the elevator doors close, Christian sees Julia arriving. He tries to stop the elevator but fails. Suddenly the power goes out, and Christian experiences a panic attack, trembling while Julia searches for her mother and heads toward the balcony. Meanwhile, John watches the monitor as the yellow dots turn red, and an assistant named Ingrid starts directing the staff to begin evacuating. Suddenly the entire ground shakes, prompting Marit to quickly pull Julia back into the building. Sondra and Mia try to protect themselves as the building begins to collapse, while Christian and Idun, still inside the elevator, descend rapidly. Suddenly, the elevator stops, causing them both to fall and lose consciousness. After the earthquake subsides, Christian helps Idun wake up, and they start to search for a way out, climbing while Christian tries to keep Idun calm. On the 34th floor, Marit wakes up to see Julia trying to help a woman, one of Idun's co-workers, who is trapped under debris. Marit quickly joins in to help, but one of the buildings begins to collapse, hitting the hotel and making it unstable. The three of them start to slip. Marit and Julia manage to survive, but Idun's co-worker does not. Meanwhile, Christian and Idun are still trying to find a way out when Idun gets injured by metal debris, cutting her leg. Christian helps her so they can reach an open elevator door together. Once there, Christian crosses first using a cable, followed by Idun. Despite Idun wanting to give up at times, Christian constantly encourages her. Eventually, Idun reaches Christian's hand, but unfortunately, the cable snaps, causing Idun to fall with the elevator. Christian is devastated by the event but doesn't give up, knowing he still needs to save his children. Sometime later, Christian finds Julia and Marit, who have managed to stay safe. With a heavy heart, Christian tells Julia about Idun, which deeply saddens her. After calming down, they start to climb to find a way out, but suddenly Julia slips, causing Christian to slide down as well. Fortunately, both survive, but they are now in danger, as the window where they landed begins to crack. Julia calls out to her father to wake him up, and Christian slowly approaches her, while Marit starts descending with a cable to help. Luckily, Christian quickly grabs Julia and hands her to Marit. The three of them then begin to climb to find a safe place to shelter. The film concludes by showing a scene sometime after the incident where Marit returns home and cries while looking at a photo of herself as a child with her father. It also shows Christian and Julia reuniting with Sondra, who has survived the earthquake along with Mia. The family is now on a ferry heading to Geiranger, where they will live together as a family. The closing message reads, "Everyone hopes the disaster is over, but scientists agree that everyone must be prepared and stay vigilant because no one knows when this disaster might happen again." And that's it for the story series of this film. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to support this channel by subscribe, like and share. See you in the next video. Goodbye.